Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Holmes again for another night of story time. And tonight, the novel we begin reading is The Red Harvest. The Red Harvest was published in 1929 by the American novelist Dashiell Hammett. The story will be narrated by the Continental Op. That's the character. He's a frequent character in Hammett's fiction, and much of this is drawn from his own experiences as an operative of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And that's fictionalized as the Continental Detective Agency. The plot follows the Op's investigation of several murders in a corrupt Montana mining town, which had been taken over by gangs following a labor dispute. Some of the novel was inspired by the Anaconda Road Massacre, a 1920 labor dispute in the mining town of Butte, Montana. The Red Harvest is actually included as one of the 100 best English language novels that were written between 1923 and 2005. Noting that, in the Continental Op, Hammett created the prototype for every sleuth who would ever be called hard-boiled. So, this particular novel is sort of a precursor to the hard-boiled novels and movies that we now associate with the term film noir or black film, meaning a film that is, or a book, okay, because many of the films started as books, right? Obviously, like The Maltese Falcon, to name just one that you might recognize. They are books, and then a lot of them made into movies that are about the culture of gang life or gangsters, or let's just say crime in general, crime families, criminal organizations, and the police, the agents, and the detectives that pursue these criminals. Included in the noir style of literature and movies is a character known as a femme fatale. And this is probably one of the first books, at least by an American author, where a femme fatale actually plays an important part in the book, makes an appearance, and is a character in the book that bears some weight on the story. So, without further ado, let us begin our new novel, Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett. Chapter 1, A Woman in Green and a Man in Gray. I first heard of Personville, called Poisonville, by a red-haired mucker named Hickey Dewey in the big ship Butte. He also called his shirt a shoit. I didn't think anything of what he had done to the city's name. Later, I heard men who could manage their R's give it the same pronunciation. I still didn't see anything in it but the meaningless sort of humor that used to make Richardsnary, the thieves' word for dictionary. A few years later, I went to Personville and learned better. Using one of the phones in the station, I called the Herald, asked for Donald Wilson, and told him I had arrived. "Will you come out to my house at 10 this evening?" He had a pleasantly crisp voice. "It's 2101 Mountain Boulevard. Take Broadway car, get off at Laurel Avenue, and walk 2 blocks west." I promised to do that. Then I rode up the Great Western Hotel, dumped my bags, and went out to look at the city. The city wasn't pretty. Most of its buildings had gone in for gaudiness. Maybe they had been successful at first, since the smelters whose brick stacks stuck up tall against a gloomy mountain to the south had yellow smoked everything into uniform dinginess. The result was an ugly city of 40,000 people set in an ugly notch between two ugly mountains that had been all dirtied up by mining. Spread over this was a grimy sky that looked as if it had come out of the smelter stacks. The first policeman I saw needed a shave. The second had a couple of buttons off his shabby uniform. The third stood in the center of the city's main intersection, Broadway and Union Street, directing traffic, with a cigar in one corner of his mouth. After that, I stopped, checking them up. At 9:30, I caught the Broadway car and followed it the directions that Donald Wilson had given me. They brought me to a house set in a hedged grass plot on a corner. The maid who opened the door told me Mr. Wilson was not home. While I was explaining that I had an appointment with him, a slender blonde woman of something less than 30 in green crepe came to the door. When she smiled, her blue eyes didn't lose their stoniness. I repeated my explanation to her. "My husband isn't in now." A barely noticeable accent slurred her S's. "But if he's expecting you, he'll probably be home shortly." She took me upstairs to a room on the Laurel Avenue side of the house, a brown and red room with lots of books in it. We sat in leather chairs, half facing each other, half a burning coal grate, and she set about learning my business with her husband. "Do you live in Personville?" she asked first. "No, San Francisco." "But this isn't your first visit." "Yes." "Really? How do you like our city?" "I haven't seen enough of it to know." That was a lie. I had. "I got in only this afternoon." Her shiny eyes stopped prying while she said, "You'll find it a dreary place." She returned to her digging with, "I suppose all mining towns are like this." "Are you engaged in mining?" "Not just now." She looked at the clock on the mantel and said, "It's inconsiderate of Donald to bring you out here and then keep you waiting at this time of the night, long after business hours." I said that it was all right, though perhaps it isn't a business matter, she suggested. I didn't say anything. She laughed, a sort of short laugh with something sharp in it. "I'm really not ordinarily so much of a busybody as you probably think," she said gaily, "but you're so excessively secretive that I can't help being curious. You aren't a bootlegger, are you? Donald changes them so often." I let her get whatever she could out of a grin. A telephone bell rang downstairs. Mrs. Wilson stretched her green slippered feet out toward the burning coal and pretended she hadn't heard the bell. I didn't know why she thought that necessary. She began, "I'm afraid I'll, and stopped to look at the maid in the doorway. The maid said Mrs. Wilson was wanted on the telephone. She excused herself and followed the maid out. She didn't go downstairs, but she spoke over an extension within earshot. I heard, "Mrs. Wilson speaking." "Yes." "I beg your pardon. Who? Can't you speak a little louder?" "What? Yes, yes. Who is this? Hello, hello?" The telephone hook rattled. Her steps sounded down the hallway in rapid steps. I set a fire to a cigarette and started at it until I heard her going down the steps. Then I went to a window, lifted an edge of the blind, and looked out on Laurel Avenue and at the square white garage that stood in the rear part of the house on that side. Presently a slender woman in a dark coat and hat came within sight, hurrying from the house to the garage. It was Mrs. Wilson. She drove away in a Buick coupe. I went back to my chair and waited. 3/4 of an hour went by. At 5 minutes after 11, automobile brakes screeched outside. 2 minutes later, Mrs. Wilson came into the room. She had taken off her hat and coat. Her face was white, her eyes almost black. "I am awfully sorry," she said, her tight-lipped mouth moving jerkily, "but you've had all this waiting for nothing. My husband won't be home tonight." I said I would get in touch with him at the Herald in the morning. I went away wondering why the green toe of her left slipper was dark and damp with something that could have been blood. I walked over to the Broadway and caught a streetcar. 3 blocks north of my hotel, I got off to see what the crowd was doing around the side of the entrance of City Hall. 30 or 40 men and a sprinkling of women stood in the sidewalk, looking at the door marked Police Department. There were men from mines and smelters still in their working clothes, gaudy boys from pool rooms and dance halls, sleek men with slick pale faces, men with a dull look of respectable husbands. A few just as respectable and dull women, and some ladies of the night. On the edge of this congregation I stopped beside a square-set man in a rumpled gray clothes. His face was grayish too, even the thick lips. Though he wasn't much older than 30, his face was broad, thick-featured, and intelligent. For color, he depended on red Windsor tie that blossomed over his gray flannel shirt. "What's the rumpus?" I asked. He looked at me carefully before I replied, as he wanted to be sure that the information was going to be in safe hands. His eyes were gray as his clothes, but not so soft. "Don Wilson's gone to sit at the right hand of God, if God don't mind looking at bullet holes." "Who shot him?" I asked. The gray man scratched his back and scratched the back of his neck and said, "Somebody with a gun." I wanted information, not wit. I would have tried my luck with some other member of the crowd in the red tie if the red tie hadn't interested me. I said, "I'm a stranger in town." Hang the Punch and Judy on me. That's what strangers are for. Donald Wilson, Esquire, publisher of the Morning and Evening Heralds, was found in Hurricane Street a little while ago, shot very dead by parties unknown, he recited in rapid sing-song. Does that keep your feelings from being hurt? Thanks. I put a finger out and touched a loose end of his tie. Mean anything, or just wearing it? "I'm Bill Quint." "The hell you are," I exclaimed, trying to place the name. "By God, I'm glad to meet you." I dug out my card case and ran through a collection of credentials I had picked up here and there by one means or another. The red card was the one I wanted. It identified me as Henry F. Neal, A.B. Seaman, member in good standing of the Industrial Workers of the World. There wasn't a word of truth in it. I passed this card to Bill Quint. He read it carefully, front and back, returned it to my hand, and looked me over from hat to shoes, not trustfully. "He's not going to die any more," he said. "Which way you going?" "Any." We walked down the street together, turned a corner aimlessly, as far as I knew. "What brought you in here, if you're a sailor?" he asked casually. "Where'd you get that idea?" "There's the card." "I got another that proves I'm a timber beast," I said. "If you want me to be a miner, I'll be one of those for you tomorrow." "You won't. I'll run 'em here." "Suppose you got a wire from Chi?" I asked. "Hell with Chi. I run 'em here." He nodded at a restaurant door and asked, "Drink?" "Only when I can get it." We went through the restaurant, up a flight of steps, and into a narrow second-story room with a long bar and a row of tables. Bill Quint nodded and said, "Hello," to some of the boys and girls at the table at the bar, and steered me into one of the green-curtained booths that lined the wall opposite the bar. We spent the next 2 hours drinking whiskey and talking. The gray man didn't think I had any right to the card I had showed him, nor to the other one I had mentioned. He didn't think I was a good wobbly. As Chief Mudderuck of the IWW in Personville, he considered it his duty to get the lowdown on me, and to not let himself be pumped about radical affairs while he was doing it. That was all right with me. I was interested in Personville affairs. He didn't mind discussing them between casual pokings into my businesses and with red cards. What I got out of him amounted to this. For 40 years, old L.U. Wilson, father of the man whom had just been killed this night, had owned Personville, heart, soul, skin, and guts. He was president and majority stockholder of the Personville Mining Corporation, ditto of the First National Bank, owner of the Morning Herald and Evening Herald, the city's only newspapers, and at least part owner of nearly every other enterprise of any importance. Along with these pieces of property, he owned a United States senator, a couple of representatives, the governor, the mayor, and most of the state legislature. Elihu Willison was Personville, and he was almost the whole state. Back in the war days, the IWW, in full bloom then throughout the West, had lined up the Personville Mining Corporation's help. The help hadn't been exactly pampered. They used their new strength to demand the things they wanted. Old Elihu gave them what he had to give them and bided his time. Bided his time, that is. In 1921 it came. Business was rotten. Old Elihu didn't care whether he shut down for a while or not. He tore up the agreements he had made with his men and began kicking them back into their pre-war circumstances. Of course, the help yelled for help. Bill Quint was sent out from the IWW headquarters in Chicago to give them some action. He was against a strike, an open walkout. He advised the old sabotage racket, staying on the job and gumming up things from the inside. But that wasn't active enough for Personville crew. They wanted to put themselves on the map, make labor history. They struck. The strike lasted 8 months. Both sides bled plenty. The Wobblies had to do their own bleeding. Old Elihu hired gunmen, strikebreakers, National Guardsmen, and even part of the regular army to do his. When the last skull had been cracked, the last rib kicked in, organized labor in Personville was a used firecracker. But, said Bill Quint, old Elihu didn't know his Italian history. He won the strike, but he lost his hold on the city and the state. To beat the miners, he had to let his hired thugs run wild. When the fight was over, he couldn't get rid of them. He had given his city to them, and he wasn't strong enough to take it back away from them. Personville looked good to them, and they took it over. They had won his strike for him, and they took the city for their spoils. He couldn't openly break with them. They had too much on him. He was responsible for all they had done during the strike. Bill Quint and I were both fairly mellow by the time we had got this far. He emptied his glass again, pushed his hair out of his eyes, and brought his history up to date. The strongest of them now is probably Pete the Finn. This stuff we're drinking's his. Then there's Lou Yard. He's got a loan shop down on Parker Street. Does a lot of bail bond business. Handles most of the burg's hot stuff. So they tell me. And is pretty thick with Noonan, the chief of police. This kid Max Thaler, Whisper, has got a lot of friends too. A little slick dark guy with something wrong with his throat. Can't talk. Gambler. Those three with Noonan just about help Elihu run his city. Help him more than he wants. But he's got to play with them or else. This fellow who was knocked off tonight, Elihu's son, where did he stand, I asked. Where Papa put him. And he's where Papa put him now. You mean the old man had him? Maybe, but that's not my guess. This Don just came home and began running the papers for the old man. It wasn't like the old devil, even if he was getting close to the grave, to let anybody or any cop or anything from him getting on without hitting back. But he had to be cagey with these guys. He brought the boy and his French wife home from Paris and used him for his monkey, a damn nice fatherly trick. Don starts a reform campaign in the papers. Clear the burg of vice and corruption, which means clear it of Pete and Lou and Whisper. If it goes far enough, get it? The old man's using the boy to shake him loose. I guess they got tired of being shook. There seems to be a few things wrong with that, I guess. I said, there's more than a few things wrong with everything in this lousy burg. Had enough of this paint? I said I had. We went down the street. Bill Quint told me he was living in the Miners' Hotel in Forest Street. His way home ran past my hotel, so we walked down together. In front of my hotel, a beefy fellow with a look of plainclothesman stood on the curb and talked to the occupant of the Stutz touring car. That's Whisper in the car, Bill Quint told me. I looked past the beefy man and saw Thaler's profile. It was young, dark, and small, with pretty features, as regular as if he had been cut by a die. He's cute, I said. Uh-huh, the gray man agreed. And so's dynamite. Chapter 2. The Czar of Poisonville. The Morning Herald gave 2 pages to Donald Wilson and his death. His picture showed a pleasant, intelligent face with curly hair, smiling eyes, and a mouth, a cleft chin, and a striped necktie. The story of his death was simple. At 10:40 the previous night, he had been shot 4 times in the stomach, chest, and back, dying immediately. The shooter had taken place at 1100 in the 1100 block of Hurricane Street. Residents of that block who looked out after hearing the shots saw the dead man lying on the sidewalk. A man and a woman were bending over him. The street was too dark for anybody to see anybody or anything clearly. The man and the woman had disappeared before anybody else reached the street. Nobody knew what they looked like. Nobody had seen them go away. 6 shots had been fired at Wilson from a .32 caliber pistol. 2 of them had missed him, going into the front wall of a house. Tracing the course of these 2 bullets, the police had learned that the shooting had been done from a narrow alley across the street. That was all anybody knew. Editorially, the Morning Herald gave a small summary of the dead man's short career as a civic reformer and expressed belief that he had been killed by some of the people who didn't want Personville cleaned up. The Herald said the chief of police could best show his lack of complicity by speedily catching and convicting the murderer or murderers. The editorial was blunt and bitter. I finished it with my second cup of coffee, jumped a Broadway car, dropped off at Laurel Avenue, turned down toward Dead Man's house. I was a half block from it when something changed my mind and my destination. A smallish young man in 3 shades of brown crossed the street ahead of me. His dark profile was pretty. He was Max Thaler, alias Whisperer. I reached the corner of Mountain Boulevard in time to catch the flash of his brown-covered rear leg vanishing into the late Donald Wilson's doorway. I went back to Broadway, found a drugstore with a phone booth in it, searched the directory for Ilya Wilson's residence number, called it, told somebody who claimed to be the old man's secretary that I had been brought from San Francisco by Donald Wilson, that I knew something about his death, and I wanted to see his father. When I made it emphatic enough, I got an invitation to call. The Czar of Poisonville was propped up in bed when his secretary, a noiseless, slim, sharp-eyed man of 40, brought me into the bedroom. The old man's head was small and almost perfectly round under its close-cut crop of white hair. His ears were too small and plastered too flat to the sides of his head to spoil the spherical effect. His nose was also small, carrying down the curve of his bony forehead. Mouth and chin were straight lines, chopping the sphere off. Below them, a short, thick neck ran down into white pajamas between square, meaty shoulders. One of his arms was outside the covers, a short, compact arm that ended in a thick-fingered, blunt hand. His eyes were round, blue, small, and watery. They looked as if they were hiding behind the watery film and under the bluey, bushy, white eyebrows, only until the time came to jump out and grab something. He wasn't the sort of man whose pocket you'd try to pick unless you had a lot of confidence in your fingers. He ordered me to a bedside chair with a 2-inch jerk of his round head, chased the secretary away with another, and asked, "What's this about my son?" His voice was harsh. His chest had too much, and his mouth too little, to do with his words for them to be clear. "I'm a Continental Detective Agency operative, San Francisco branch," I told him. "A couple of days ago, we got a check from your son and a letter asking that a man be sent here to do some work for him. I'm the man. He told me to come out to his house last night. I did, but he didn't show up. When I got downtown, I learned he'd been killed." Ilya Wilson peered suspiciously at me and asked, "Well, what of it?" "While I was waiting for your daughter-in-law, got a phone call and a message. She went out, came back with what looked like blood on her shoe, and told me her husband wouldn't be home." He was shot at 10:40. She went out at 10:20, came back at 11:05. The old man sat straight up in bed and called young Mrs. Wilson a flock of things. When he ran out of words of that sort, he still had some breath left. He used it to shout at me, "Is she in jail?" I said I didn't think so. He didn't like her not being in jail. He was pretty nasty about it. He bawled a lot of things I didn't like, winding up with, "What the hell are you waiting for?" He was too old and too sick to be smacked. I laughed and said, "For evidence." "Evidence? What do you need to do?" Don't be a chump," I interrupted his bawling. Why should she kill him?" "Because she's a French hussy. Because she..." The secretary's frightened face appeared at the door. "Get out of here," the old man roared at it, and the face went. "She jealous?" I asked before he could go on with his shouting. "And if you don't yell, maybe I'll be able to hear you anyway. My deafness is a lot better since I've been eating yeast." He put a fist on top of each hump of his thighs, made the covers, and pushed his square chin at me. "Old as I am, and sick as I am," he said, very deliberately, "I've a great mind to get up and kick your behind." I paid no attention to that, repeating, "Was she jealous?" "She was," he said, not yelling now, but domineering and spoiled and suspicious and greedy and mean and unscrupulous and deceitful and selfish and damned bad altogether, damned bad. "Any reason for her jealousy?" "I hope so," he said bitterly. "I hate to think a son of mine would be faithful to her, though likely enough he was. He'd do things like that." "But you don't know any reason why she should have killed him." "Don't know any reason?" He was bellowing again. "Haven't I been telling you that?" "Yeah, but none of that means anything. It's kind of childish." The old man flung the covers back from his legs and started to get out of bed. Then he thought better of it, raised his red face and roared, "Stanley!" The door opened to let the secretary glide in. "Throw this bastard out," his master ordered, waving a fist at me. The secretary turned to me. I shook my head and suggested, "Better get help." He frowned. We were about the same age. He was weedy, nearly a head taller than I, but 50 pounds lighter. Some of my 190 pounds were fat, but not all of them. The secretary fidgeted, smiled apologetically, and went away. "What I was about to say," I told the old man. "I intended talking to your son's wife this morning, but I saw Max Thaler go into the house, so I postponed my visit." Ilya Wilson carefully pulled the covers up over his legs again, leaned back on the pillows, screwed his eyes up to the ceiling, and said, "So that's the way it is it? Mean anything?" "She killed him," he said certainly. "That's what it means." Feet made noises in the hall, huskier feet than the secretary. Then they were just outside the door. I began a sentence. "You were using your son to run a..." "Get out of here," the old man yelled at those in the doorway, "and keep that door closed." He glowered at me and demanded, "What was I using my son for?" "To put the knife in Thaler Yard and Finn." "You're a liar. I didn't invent the story. It's all over Personville." "It's a lie. I gave him the papers. He did what he wanted with them." "You ought to explain that to your playmates. They believe you." "What they believe be damned. What I'm telling you is so." "What of it? Your son won't come back to life just because he was killed by mistake, if he was." "That woman killed him." "Maybe." "Damn you and your maybes. She did." "Maybe, but the other angle has got to be looked at too, the political end. You can't tell me. I can tell you that French hussy killed him, and I can tell you that any other damn numbskull notions you've got are way off the load. But they've got to be looked into," I insisted. "And you know the inside of Personville politics better than anyone else I'm likely to find. He was your son. The least you can do is, the least I can do, he bellowed, is to tell you to get the hell back to Frisco, you and your numbskull. I got up and said unpleasantly, I'm at the Great Western Hotel. Don't bother me unless you want to talk sense for a change. I went out of the bedroom and down the stairs. The secretary hovered around the bottom step, smiling apologetically. A fine old rowdy, I growled. Ah, remarkable, vital personality, he murmured. At the office of the Herald, I hunted up the murdered man's secretary. She was a small girl of 19 or 20, with wide chestnut eyes, light brown hair, and a pale, pretty face. Her name was Lewis. She said she hadn't known anything about my being called to Personville by her employer. But then, she explained, Mr. Wilson always liked to keep everything to himself, as long as he could. It was, I don't think he trusted anybody here completely. Not you? She flushed and said, No. But, of course, he had been here such a short while and didn't know any of us very well. There must have been more to it than that. Well, she bit her lip and made a row of fingerprints down the polished edge of the dead man's desk. His father wasn't in sympathy with what he was doing. Since his father really owned the papers, I suppose it was natural for Mr. Donald to think some of the employees might be more loyal to Mr. Iliu than him. The old man wasn't in favor of the reform campaign. Why did he stand for it if the papers were his? She bent her head to study the fingerprints she had made. Her voice was low. It's not easy to understand unless you know. The last time Mr. Iliu was taken sick, he sent for Donald, Mr. Donald. Mr. Donald had lived in Europe most of his life, you know. Dr. Pride told Mr. Iliu that he'd have to give up the management of his affairs, so he grabbed his son to come home. But when Mr. Donald got here and Mr. Iliu couldn't make up his mind to let go of everything, but he wanted Mr. Donald to stay here. So he gave him the newspapers. That's it. Made him publisher. Mr. Donald liked that. He had been interested in journalism in Paris. When he found out how terrible everything was here in civic affairs and so on, he started that reform campaign. He didn't know he had been away since he was a boy, so he didn't know. He didn't know that his father was in it as deep as anybody else. I helped her along. She squirmed a little over her examination of the fingerprints, didn't contradict me, and went on. Mr. Iliu and he quarreled. Mr. Iliu told him to stop stirring things up, but he wouldn't stop. Maybe he would have stopped if he had known all there was to know. But I don't suppose it would ever have occurred to him that his father was really seriously implicated, and his father wouldn't tell him. I suppose it would be hard for a father to tell a son a thing like that. He threatened to take the papers away from Mr. Donald. I don't know whether he intended to or not, but he was taken sick again, and everything went along as it did. Donald Wilson didn't confide in you? I asked. No. It was almost a whisper. Then you learned all this where? I'm trying to help you learn who murdered him, she said earnestly. You've no right to. You'll help me most just now by telling me where you learned all this, I insisted. She stared at the desk, chewing her lower lip. I waited. Presently she said, My father is Mr. Wilson's secretary. Thanks. But you mustn't think that It's nothing to me, I assured her. What was Wilson doing in Hurricane Street last night when he had a date with me at his house? She said she didn't know. I asked her if she had heard him tell me over the phone to come to his house at 10 o'clock. She said she had. What did he do after that? Try to remember every last thing that was said and done from then until you left at the end of day. She leaned back in her chair, shut her eyes, wrinkled her forehead. You called up if it was you he told to come to the house at about 2 o'clock. After that, Mr. Donald dictated some letters, one to a paper mill, one to a Senator Kiefer, about some changes in the post office regulations. And, oh yes, he went out for about 20 minutes, a little before 3, and before he went, he wrote a check out. Who for? I don't know, but I saw him writing it. Where's the checkbook? Carried it with him? It's here. She jumped up, went around to the front of his desk, and tried the top drawer. Locked. I joined her, straightened a wire clip, and with that and a blade of my knife, fiddled the drawer open. The girl took out a thin, flat First National Bank checkbook. The last used stub was marked $5,000. Nothing else. No name, no explanation. He went out with this check, I said, and was gone 20 minutes, long enough to get to the bank and back. It wouldn't have taken him more than 5 minutes to get there. Didn't anything else happen before he wrote the check out? Think. Any messages, letters, phone calls? Let's see. She shut her eyes again. He was dictating some mail and... Oh, how stupid of me. He did have a phone call. He said, yes, I can be there at 10, but I shall have to hurry away. Then again he said, very well, at 10. That was all he said except for yes, yes, several times. Talking to a man or woman. I didn't know. Think there'd be a difference in his voice, she thought, and said, then it was a woman. Which of you or he left first in the evening? I did. He told you my father is Mr. Elihu's secretary. He and Mr. McDonald had an engagement for the early part of the evening, something about the paper's finances. Father came in a little after 5. They were going to dinner all together, I think. That was all the Lewis girl could give me. She knew nothing that would explain Wilson's presence in the 1100 block of Hurricane Street, she said. She admitted knowing nothing about Mr. Wilson. We frisked the dead man's desk and dug up nothing in the way of an informative. I went up against the girls at the switchboard and learned nothing. I put in an hour's work on messengers, city editors, and the like, and my pumping brought up nothing. The dead man, as his secretary said, had been a good hand at keeping his affairs to himself. And that, my friends, is the end of Chapter 2 of The Red Harvest. I hope you are starting to like this story. It gets better and better with every chapter. This is just the introduction. So, tonight was a short one, just about 40 minutes, because we were finishing the other book, The Island of Dr. Moreau, which was about 15 minutes. So I don't want to go too far over our hour. So we will continue this book, The Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, on Monday evening at 6 p.m. I hope you all join me next Monday at 6 p.m. for Chapters 3, 4, and possibly Chapter 5. We'll see what we can fit into 1 hour on Monday. Thanks very much, everybody. Hope to see you on Monday. And if you want to see me live streaming, Lizzie and I will be live streaming on Sunday. We'll try to get there as early as possible. I don't know if we'll be able to make it for rope drop, but we'll be there between 8 and 9 a.m. All right, my friends, have a wonderful weekend. Love to you all.